Now to our new segment, Stars and Gripes, where we turn a spotlight on the absurdity and partisan hackery dominating the US media landscape. If you think US journalists learnt their lesson after falling ill with Trump derangement syndrome in 2016 and destroying their own credibility, pushing hoaxes such as Russia buying Donald Trump, or the lie that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian information operation, you would be mistaken. Trump had only been president for a few hours when journalists abandoned all ethics to pursue the most ludicrous of lines of attack.
The takeover of the United States by a base mentality of greed and corruption.
And we're about to enter an era of deep fakes and all sorts of misinformation.
I think we do all have to recognize that this is tough.
Donors and billionaires who are what are they doing there? And then seamlessly into Javier Milei and other right-wing political leaders from foreign countries, which again is not a normal thing.
It's people who will give him what he wants and allow him to do to the American people, to immigrants whom Jesus loved.
Guys, I have to say, I'm looking at this crowd. I do not see many people of color.
On Martin Luther King Jr. Day,
Donald Trump repurposed for himself manifest destiny, which is one of the most racist concepts in the history of America.
They only end up harming their own credibility with this sort of commentary. But joining me to discuss the media's reaction to a Trump presidency is Sky News contributor Kosha Garda. Kosha, how would you rate the media's very early performance of the inauguration coverage?
Predictable, Jack, and great to be with you. And there's, one very important stat that people often cite, which is Gallup and other polls, but primarily Gallup, have been measuring trust from the public, the U.S. public, in various institutions, including the media. And in the 1970s, this was at around 65 to 70%, where people trusted the mainstream media. It's been going through this precipitous fall, and today it's completely flipped, where it's 25 to 30% of people trust the media, second only to Congress. That's the only institution they trust less. So we see that, and the reason for that is this kind of analysis, such as what you played, as well as some structural differences that have happened in the industry with tech platforms and the internet, where there are just so many more sources of getting news. That actually ups the ante and the onus on people in media to be providing original insights and logical things that add value to the way consumers consume information, and they're just not doing that. And that's why they're just stuck in this downward spiral, and unfortunately I think we're just going to see a continued decline of trust.
Yeah, and a big theme there, I think, was the focus on identity politics. You saw race mentioned, you saw threat to democracy mentioned, but one thing that I couldn't help but notice, there seems to almost be a rejection that he actually won the election, and this is the mandate that he's going forward with.
Yes, there's something else too, where the early days of journalism, often a lot of those journalists were these brass knuckle types who came out of the middle of the country or working class backgrounds, and they were just closer to the constituents, and the readers were actually the constituents of the electorate. And that, for many reasons, has changed now, where a lot of people in journalism back in the US are from coastal elites, and they go to these journalism schools, and they're sort of in their bubbles in California and New York, and they really are out of touch with the electorate. Most of them don't probably even have any interaction or know any family members or friends that are part of the middle of the country and that electorate that gave him that resounding victory. So they really are in these echo chambers, and I honestly think that a lot of them just truly are scratching their heads and have no understanding of how or why or the depth of the Trump victory and why it was so resounding.
Yeah, they still do not appear to understand why he won and why people were so outraged at the last administration. But let's move on, because it isn't just President Trump getting this sort of coverage. His allies are now in the crosshairs.
And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you. My heart goes out to you. It is thanks to you that the future of civilization is assured.
I want to look at that salute that he gave again, just if anybody missed it, we'll just show it again. He's just wrapped up here. You can hear the... All right, so we just showed that. We just showed that.
Right. It's worth
salute.
It was quick. I think our viewers are smart and they can take a look at that, but it certainly was, it's not something that you typically see at American political rallies.
That was Elon Musk gesturing to a crowd, and of course the media calls him a Nazi. Now, CNN was very careful not to directly state that Musk was a Nazi, but we all know what they were trying to say, and they were not alone. The Guardian Australia even went a few steps further, just stating as a fact that he was making a Nazi salute, even though their own story quoted the Anti-Defamation League, which disputed this, saying it was awkward, but perhaps all sides of politics should give one another a bit of grace. And can't we just ask the person what their intent was? Because Musk says it wasn't meant to be a Nazi salute. And if the media has a problem with politicians gesturing to crowds, they might have something to say about these. Kosha, what do you make of this? Quite an extraordinary attempt to seize on the gesture and to go back to their same playbook that anyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi, and now we've finally got the evidence.
They're so unoriginal, and that, we've been living through almost for the better part of the decade, that tactic against Trump, and now it no longer works on Teflon Don, as he has long been known. So they're training their sights on some of his allies and people in his inner circle who are new to politics, like Elon Musk. But I don't think it'll work anymore because they've tried it again and again. We've seen the result of this election and even the first time, and even the 2020 election. Trump did grow his support even though he didn't win. So nobody believes this. They're in their bubble. It also doesn't make any sense. It's intellectually lazy because if you take it one step further, what are they suggesting? That a South African turned American entrepreneur is secretly a Nazi and he's doing some kind of secret gesture now? He's deciding to come out and do that. It just makes no sense. They're obviously live on the air, the CNN hosts, and just had to come up with something to fill the airtime, and they're not very creative. So that's where they went.
Yeah, well said. Well, let's move on to a huge issue which many in the media simply ignored. Outgoing President Joe Biden pardoned his immediate family from crimes that we're not even being told about.
Blowback over the Hunter Biden pardon has been swift. Republican lawmakers quick to criticize President Biden over this. Some Democrats also speaking out about the bad precedent that they fear that this sets.
Yes, according to CNN, it is just some Republicans and some Democrats angry about these entirely corrupt and inappropriate pardons. And according to CNN, the problem is not the pardons themselves, but the precedent they set. Because now the other side of politics has full political cover to do the same thing. Now, the language they use is very deliberate. Some commentators on CNN, such as political contributor Karen Finney, were even outright defending the pardons.
Well, look, literally, the president recognizes that Republicans have been, for years now, trying to attack the president himself, go after his family. And when you have someone who literally ran their campaign on retribution, on the idea of I will be your retribution and getting back at his enemies, I would imagine, obviously I haven't spoken to the president about this, but I would imagine the president took a look at this and said, I want to make sure this is ironclad, that there is nothing that can be done to circumvent what I'm going to do to protect my son and to try to take the target off of his back once and for all.
But back in 2020, the US media was looking at pardons in a different light. Now, at the time, there were reports that Trump had discussed the prospect of pardoning his own family members, and this is how the media reacted.
Have you ever heard of somebody getting a preemptive pardon who was innocent of all crime? Who's just an innocent person? Have you ever heard of that? Just somebody getting a blanket pardon and they're an innocent person?
But no, it's the president's own family. It's people that have been covering up for the president in addition to his own family.
Is there an innocent explanation for someone to seek preemptive pardons for family members? Would you do that if you knew you were innocent and just worried about outside forces?
The answer to that is going to be no. If you haven't done anything wrong, you sit there and go, what do you need a preemptive pardon for?
If he pardons people preemptively, he's essentially telling the public that these people have committed crimes. And we may not be aware of what they are, but the pardon is clear evidence that crimes have been committed.
Kosha, what are your views on this?
So good. I wonder if those contributors and people like that genuinely have short memories, or they think we can't find videotape. And in this day and age of social media and X and whatnot, those things very quickly get found out, circulated, go viral, and they show mashups of literally opposing things that the same person said 4 years apart. So it doesn't work, and I wonder why they still do it. Maybe they're speaking to that small swath of the public that still is getting their news only from traditional sources and no other sources that do this real-time fact-checking in real life. Everybody knows it. The numbers, again, with pardons. The last two presidents, Trump and Obama, did around 1,700 to 1,900 pardons throughout their term. And before that, it was even less. And these Biden pardons total 8,064. That tells us one of two things. Either the American justice system somehow just completely broke in the Biden years that required him to use his presidential pardon power so freely, or he's somebody who's been playing fast and loose with his presidential pardon power, and the nature of these blanket 11-year pardons to all sorts of people. Nobody is being fooled by it. It doesn't look good. It is setting a very dangerous precedent, and I think it's going to really damage his legacy when history books look back and write about the Biden years.
Oh, his legacy's in tatters. And I mean, Kosher, the other thing is he told the American people he wouldn't do these pardons. There's an extra element to it. And I don't know why we all just can't agree in the media, as commentators, everybody, that perhaps nobody should be doing these broad, sweeping pardons that lack transparency, that don't specify what crimes we're talking about. But we're having this situation where just one side of politics, well, they're defending it.
Yes, and it's never been done before, these types of preemptive blanket pardons. So there actually is a very interesting legal discussion that's emerging in the U.S. right now about whether or not they actually can stand up in court. And it'll be very interesting to see if the Trump DOJ decides to pursue that and maybe prosecute some of these people anyway, and then they would submit this preemptive pardon as their defense. That probably would make its way up to the Supreme Court, and it would be a very new issue that's never landed on the Supreme Court's desk before, and it'll be very interesting to see how they rule on that. Also, these people are not immune from states prosecuting them, because presidential pardon only covers them federally, and they're also not protected from civil lawsuits. So they still do have legal exposure, and it's going to be very interesting to see if different prosecutorial offices in the country decide to pursue it, just to sort of figure out what happened under here that warranted, in Biden's mind, necessitated these types of blanket pardons.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at least tell us what the crimes are that they're agreeing to be pardoned from. But look, moving on, because a bishop at Donald Trump's inaugural prayer service hijacked the service to rant about immigration and other social issues right in front of the president. And just seeing the look on President Trump's face while she turned the sermon political made for great TV.
In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meatpacking plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals.
The bishop suddenly became a media star, and soon she was on The View to discuss her brave and fearless outburst.
Let me ask you this. You seem to have more fearlessness than anyone in Congress right now, ma'am. What made you decide to use that opportunity for this message, or didn't you have any apprehension about it?
My response, thank you, first of all, for allowing me to be with you today. My responsibility that morning, yesterday morning, was to reflect, to pray with the nation for unity. And as I was pondering what are the foundations of unity, I wanted to emphasize respecting the honor and dignity of every human being.
Kosher, the media, particularly in the US, is very good at using emotion to drive debates. And I think we've seen evidence on this with the immigration debate, where there are people crying on the border as if, this one individual case has, more weight than the more macro issue of capacity in the country, etc. What did you make of the way that this woman just became a star? She became the champion of the people on The View, who, very soft interview, by the way. What do you make of the way that they've done that?
Emotion is very powerful. It speaks more powerfully than facts and logic, so it makes sense that it's a tactic the media uses. But I do think in time, if you keep repeating the same original tactic again and again, it does lose its bite, and that's certainly happening, back to the trust in media being at an all-time low. I also would say that a Christian holy message shouldn't require a PR tour after that. If she really was using prayer to bring unity, as she said, why is she running around in the media? That's not something we typically see from priests or people from the church, so that's interesting. There's been lots of investigations into who she is, and she's been a political activist and quite staunchly opposed to Trump for many years. That's all coming out now. But, this will run its course. I don't think it's going to change any minds or certainly change the agenda that Team Trump is pursuing full speed with respect to immigration and the other issues that she raised. And this will probably be in the dustbin of history by next week.
Coach Agata, thank you for your insight.